The UN Secretary General is speaking in New York. Antonio Guterres is speaking as new alarming climate data is released today. Let's bring you some of that speech.
For the entire planet, it is a disaster. And for scientists, it is unequivocal. Humans are to blame. All this is entirely consistent with predictions and repeated warnings. The only surprise is the speed of the change. Climate change is here, it is terrifying, and it is just the beginning. The era of global warming has ended, the era of global boiling has arrived. The air is unbreathable, the heat is unbearable, and the level of fossil fuel profits and climate inaction is unacceptable. Leaders must lead. No more hesitancy, no more excuses, no more waiting for the others to move first. There is simply no more time for that. It is still possible to limit global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius and avoid the very worst of climate change, but only with dramatic, immediate climate action. We have seen some progress, a robust rollout of renewables, some positive steps from sectors such as shipping, but none of this is going far enough or fast enough. Accelerating temperatures demand accelerated action. We have several critical opportunities ahead: the Africa Climate Summit, the G20 Summit, the UN Climate Ambition Summit, COP28. But leaders, and particularly G20 countries responsible for 80% of global emissions, must step up for climate action and climate justice. What does that mean in practice? First, emissions. We need ambitious new national emissions reduction targets from G20 members. And we need all countries to take action in line with my Climate Solidarity Pact and Acceleration Agenda. Hitting fast forward so that developed countries commit to reach net zero emissions as close as possible to 2040, and the emerging economies as close as possible to 2050, with support from developed countries to do so. And all actors must come together to accelerate a just and equitable transition from fossil fuels to renewables, as we stop oil and gas expansion and funding and licensing for new coal, oil and gas. Credible plans must also be presented to exit coal by 2030 for OECD countries and 2040 for the rest of the world. Ambitious renewable energy goals must be in line with 1.5 degree limit. And we must reach net zero electricity by 2035 in developed countries and 2040 elsewhere, as we work to bring affordable electricity to everyone on Earth. We also need action from leaders beyond governments. I urge companies, as well as cities, regions, and financial institutions to come to the Climate Ambition Summit with credible transition plans that are fully aligned with the United Nations net zero standard presented by our high-level expert group. Financial institutions must end their fossil fuel lending, underwriting, and investments and shift to renewables instead. And fossil fuel companies must chart their move towards clean energy with detailed transition plans across the entire value chain. No more greenwashing, no more deception, and no more abusive distortion of antitrust laws to sabotage net zero alliances. Second, adaptation. Extreme weather is becoming the new normal. All countries must respond and protect their people from the searing heat, fatal floods, storms, droughts, and raging fires that result. Those countries on the front lines who have done the least to cause the crisis and have the least resources to deal with it must have the support they need to do so. It's time for a global surge in adaptation investment to save millions of lives from climate change. And that requires unprecedented coordination around the priorities and plans of vulnerable developing countries. Developed countries must present a clear and credible roadmap to double adaptation finance by 2025 as a first step towards devoting at least half of all climate finance to adaptation. every person on Earth must be covered by an early warning system by 2027 by implementing the action plan we launched last year. And countries should consider a set of global goals to mobilize international action and support on adaptation. And that leads to the third area for accelerated action, finance. Promises made on international climate finance must be promises kept. Developed countries must honor their commitments to provide $100 billion a year to developing countries for climate support and fully replenish the Green Climate Fund. I am concerned that only 2 G7 countries, Canada and Germany, have made until now replenishment pledges. Countries must also operationalize the Loss and Damage Fund at COP28 this year. No more delays, no more excuses. More broadly, many banks, investors, and other financial actors continue to reward polluters and incentivize wrecking the planet. We need a course correction in the global financial system so that it supports accelerated climate action. That includes putting a price on carbon and pushing the multilateral development banks to overhaul their business models and approaches to risk. We need the multilateral development banks leveraging their funds to mobilize much more private finance at reasonable costs to developing countries and scaling up their funding to renewables, adaptation, and loss and damage. In all these areas, we need government, civil society, business, and others working in partnership to deliver. I look forward to welcoming first movers and doers on the acceleration agenda to New York for the Climate Ambition Summit in September, and to hearing how leaders will respond to the facts before us. This is the price of entry. The evidence is everywhere. Humanity has unleashed destruction. This must not inspire despair, but action. We can still stop the worst, but to do so, we must turn a year of burning heat into a year of burning ambition and accelerate climate action now. Enfin, permettez-moi.
Allow me now to say a few words about the deeply worrying situation in Niger. Let's be clear. The United Nations strongly condemns the assault against the democratically elected government and supports the efforts of ECOWAS and the African Union to restore democracy. Yesterday, I spoke to President Bazoum, expressed our full solidarity to him.
Antonio Guterres, now moving on to other subjects. We've got our science and technology editor, Tom Clark, here in the studio, who was watching that speech along with us. And Antonio Guterres, you know, gives a good speech, doesn't he? He talked about the global warming era being over. We're now into the era of global boiling. And the backdrop to all of that, he outlined it at the start. This month, July 2023, the hottest ever. It's record-breaking across the board. This is the backdrop to that speech.
Yeah, and that's what prompted that. Yeah, obviously, very impassioned speech, and we can come on to more of what he was talking about in a second. But this took a bit. I've been covering this for a while, and it took a bit to sink in. For me, this isn't just the hottest July on record. This is the hottest month ever recorded by the systems that we have on planet Earth, and those records go back to the 19th century. This is a significant moment. And remember, July in the Northern Hemisphere isn't typically the hottest month even. It's normally August when we see those really high temperatures. This is also a global average. It's winter in the Southern Hemisphere right now. So this is just looking at average temperatures as a whole through the month of July, and they've beaten the previous record by a significant margin. 0.3 degrees to be precise. Doesn't sound like a lot, but in terms of global averages, it's significantly higher than the previous record. And it's why the World Meteorological Organization, which is the kind of the official body that does these things, is confident enough to come out a week before July even ends to say it's going to be the hottest July on record. There would have to be some, mini ice age for the next 5 days to bring the average low enough for this not to have this dubious title.
Yeah,